It's become clear to me that Xbox is clearing the board for something huge. They've uncharacteristically front-loaded the first half of this year, 2025, not only with releases, but also with press conferences. Zenimax Online Studio has not only held an online event discussing the future of ESO in 2025, but it has also done a 4-part podcast series with kind of funny games ahead of Xbox's June showcase. Zenimax Online Studios is one of the few Xbox studios that is working on a totally unknown project. The messaging could not be more clear. Zenimax Online Studios will be present at the traditional Xbox showcase in June, but they will not be discussing The Elder Scrolls Online. What might this new game be? Well, as you might have guessed from the title of this video, I believe it's a Star Wars MMO. This video is going to contain plenty of speculation, so let's lay out the things we know for sure and what circles discussing the Shadow title seem to agree on. Firstly, we know that Zenimax Online Studios is developing at least one new game that is most likely an MMO. That game has been in development since 2018. Both Ben Jones and Matt Firer, senior staff at Zenimax Online Studios, referenced this new big project as being a new IP, as an intellectual property, in 2022. Two sister studios to Zenimax Online Studios, Machine Games and Arcane, have either made or are in the middle of making games in two of Disney's other major intellectual properties. The first being Machine Games' Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and the other being Arcane's game based on Marvel's character Blade. We also know that Nick Baker and Scalzi both reported that Zenimax Online Studios are working on something Star Wars related way back in 2022. It is believed through some references in older job postings that whatever the new game is, it's likely sci-fi involving vehicles. And we also know that initially Xbox passed on the publishing rights for the Knights of the Old Republic remake. Before I continue with my total speculation as to why this project is going to be a Star Wars MMO, let's go through reasons why it could not be. The common counterpoints to the idea that ZeniMax Online Studios are developing a Star Wars MMO include the job posting board page mentioning several projects, including a new AAA IP. The fact that Ben and Matt called the new game a new IP in their own individual interviews about 3 years ago. The fact that SWTOR already exists at Star Wars The Old Republic, which is a long-standing MMO that launched in, I think, 2011, just after Star Wars Galaxies closed down earlier that same month in 2011. And there's also this idea that Disney would have said something, or there would have been some sort of leak by now, if it even was a Star Wars title. I don't think any of those things are necessarily dispositive. I think that they are certainly things to consider, and I'll go through why. So that job posting board does mention a new AAA IP, but it's one of several projects as of today, which is May 24th, 2025. And none of the actual job postings, at least currently on there, specify new IP hires. Instead, they cite, a new AAA experience. And it seems like they've walked back the new IP language. What I think probably happened is that those interviews with Ben and Matt occurred before the expiration of the Disney exclusivity deal with Electronic Arts. That expired, I believe, sometime in early to mid 2023, which would have been 6 months to a year prior to after those interviews. If you've been following the industry for long enough, you'll know that there are plenty of licensed games that have actually started out as original IP products that end up being retooled from their original intellectual property to whatever is licensed when the opportunity presents itself. In fact, very oftentimes, games will be devised as original IPs and then presented to the license holder, being like, hey, imagine this as a Star Wars game or a Star Trek game or a Dune game and such like this. It's not wholly dispositive that the game is not Star Wars related based on the fact that it once was an original IP, especially considering the fact that two sister companies, as I mentioned earlier, Machine Games and Arcane, are already playing around with one of the largest Lucasfilm intellectual properties, that's for sure, in Indiana Jones, and Marvel's Blade. Blade is not a character that Disney's going to be, or shouldn't be at least, heading off to just any old studio. So I think that it might have been part of a larger sort of test run to see if there were any other publishers that, and I hope this isn't the case, that Disney might be looking to sign exclusivity deals with. It might have been the cards that this is Bethesda, Zenimax Media Group, when they were independent, their opportunity to prove that they are more worthy of license ownership, not ownership, but being licensed out the Star Wars property or Indiana Jones in the future than someone like EA. Regarding the existence of the Old Republic, Star Wars Galaxies ran basically up until the day the Old Republic came out, and the Old Republic was being developed almost throughout the entire life cycle of Star Wars Galaxies. I think Galaxies had probably been around for maybe like 3 to 6 years before the Old Republic had started booting up, so Lucasfilm certainly has no concerns about this sort of cannibalization. They seem very much into the idea that once a game has had its time in the sun and it's time to move on, then that's just fine. So I don't think SWTOR's existence is dispositive at all of any new game, MMO or MMO Lite, being developed. It is definitely worth noting that SWTOR continues to be at least somewhat profitable for it to be still left open under broadsword stewardship. I will note this is also a little bit of a positive spin on this. It seems to be going into basically maintenance mode, which means that they're dumping way less money into maintaining this game. Not saying that I don't feel bad for the people that still enjoy SWTOR, but that indicates to me that Lucasfilm and Disney might be ready to move on. But it's been profitable enough that I think that it would definitely pique their interest to put a third one out there, especially a game with modern combat, modern technology like server meshing, which I'm sure Zenimax Online Studios has probably researched at least a little bit, with places like Funcom and Cloud Imperium Games at least having done that. Funcom looking into it's a big deal, because Funcom is not nearly as indie a company as SIG. They're considerably more corporate, so there really has to be a future in that technology amongst other MMO developers, I think. And I don't think ZeniMax would have ignored or not noticed that sort of opportunity. I also think it's worth noting that Scalzi and Dick Baker's reports about Zenimax Online Studios at least developing a quote-unquote Mandalorian game. Whether or not it's an MMO and whether or not it's only about Mandalorians is a different question entirely. But the rumor has gone unanswered for so long, but has been so persistent in the sense that people keep bringing it up. It's constantly brought up on Reddit, constantly brought up on Twitter. If it wasn't real, if there wasn't some substance behind it in the sense that something might have been developed and even abandoned, you'd think Lucasfilm would want to get rid of that rumor as quickly as possible if it wasn't true, especially considering all of the development struggles Star Wars games have had in recent years. I also think that, generally there is a serious lack of multiplayer Star Wars games right now. Every multiplayer Star Wars game that has come out since I was in college, which, just so you know, was about a decade ago, none of them are receiving service currently, except for the Aspire remakes of Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast. Some of that remasters that they have released, they still have some online support. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 2017 has not received an update in I think 3 or 4 years. Squadrons, basically, I think the servers might be off totally, but they have received no updates or support basically since I think 2022, maybe 2021. And that's a massive gap. Star Wars games have pretty long lifespans in multiplayer communities. Battlefront 2, the original one, lasted for a very, very long time, which is what sparked the EA reboot anyway. So the fact that they've gone essentially 7 years for the most robust multiplayer game in Battlefront 2, and then even the small-scale multiplayer game that they weren't even willing to commit to, is wild unless they have something that they're that they're in the middle of developing, that they might be, figuring things out, testing certain methodology, figuring out the technology. If it is an MMO with Twitch-based combat, essentially Star Wars Galaxies with Battlefront 2 combat, and maybe with Battlefront 2 flight systems, or maybe with Squadrons flight systems. That's going to take a while for them to figure out. And they certainly don't want that announcement to be deflated when they make it. And I guess, going back to Xbox, I think that the fact that they skipped out on that original Knights of the Old Republic remake opportunity that they were actually lambasted for in the media, like, how do you skip out on this? This is crazy. Probably would have motivated them to take this. The fact that they are clearing essentially all developers, Bethesda Game Studios proper and the studio that worked on Elder Scrolls Remake, the fact that they got that question mark off the board that everybody was thinking might have been announced in June, as well as any updates for ESO, getting that out of the way literally weeks before your June showcase. And this is the Bethesda studio that has not announced or shown anything, is a real indicator that something massive's on play here. And I don't think that they would have done that if it was just a new sci-fi MMO that was not a licensed IP. Because if you have a new Star Wars MMO coming out and it is every bit as, love them or hate them because Scam Citizen and all that bullshit, but the fact that Star Citizen can have 500 players with Twitch combat and involved careers to in the sense of everything has a mechanic, mining is involved in Star Citizen, with relatively stable servers at this point. Not perfectly stable, but relatively stable servers. If that existed to any sort of extent in the Star Wars IP, it's all people are going to be talking about. And it is the sort of thing that I think could rejuvenate faith in the IP if they use it the right way. This is the sort of thing that if they execute on the gameplay very well, and it's a high budget production with proper management, this is the sort of thing Disney could use to establish a new time period, create distance between themselves and the clusterfuck that was the sequel trilogy, or even reestablish a canon version of the Old Republic era, or save the High Republic era too. It gives them a whole sandbox to play in lore-wise. Reestablish, change the status quo, have a setting for all their new movies. It just seems like a win-win for everybody involved, and it seems like the signs are pointing in that direction. Again, this is speculation. I don't have any concrete sources on this. It just seems like it's a shoo-in. Zenimax Online Studios, part of the Zenimax Media Group banner, sisters to the studio that created Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, great game, sister to Arcane that is going to be creating Marvel's Blade. It's the only major, action IP, Disney IP, that Bethesda and the Zenimax Group have not had a chance to play with yet. And I don't think it's because they haven't been given the opportunity. I think it's because they aren't ready. Let me know what you think about this conspiracy theory in the comments. I have been Wolf with Honor Bound Gaming. See you later.